Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and take a look at the 2016 Retina Macbook Pro and see how this specific MacBook holds up in 2022. Now what I will definitely tell you is that this MacBook had the potential of being one of the coolest devices Apple has ever made, and I personally do think it's one of the most impactful MacBooks that Apple ever released, not only for the good, but also for the bad. Now I do think how this MacBook holds up in this day and age is a little bit different than how it held up before, because Apple has completely changed up their lineup like crazy, and I do think their MacBooks, past 2020 are amazing and they're very, very much worth it. But I do think with this specific MacBook Pro, the 13-inch and the 15-inch model that came out this year, I think they brought a lot of different things to the table. They brought a new design, they brought that touch bar, they brought a bigger trackpad, they arguably brought a better display, which I also did like, and they changed up the outside, and they also brought USB Type-C ports. Now those things I like a lot. The outside of the body is super relevant to this day and age, and when you still think about a 2016 MacBook, in my opinion, these things design-wise still look beautiful. I think within the next 10 to 20 years, you'll still be able to pick up these MacBooks and you will still be like, wow, these things look so future-proof, like they still look so amazing. And then when you look at something like, 10 years ago with those certain MacBooks, like back in 2012, that's a bad example. The 2012 MacBooks look great. But if you look back 15 years, certain MacBooks of those day and age, like even the 2009 MacBook and things, they don't look amazing in my opinion. Even with the 2007 MacBooks, those things don't look amazing. Even in 2017, they didn't look that great. But in 2022, looking back at the 2016 MacBooks, these things look so good still, and I'm so happy that Apple approached this route. It's just internally, there were so many issues in my opinion. Now on the outside, you had a little bit of a different design choice from the 2015 ones, but from 2016 to 2022, they still kind of look exactly the same on the outside. Now on the top, you had the Apple logo, which was great. There was that 13-inch and 15-inch model as well. So if you wanted the smaller model, you can go for the 13-inch one. If you wanted the bigger one, you can go for the 15-inch one. Now, when you go ahead and actually open this thing up, that's where the differences start to kind of align at. The panel on this thing, like I mentioned, looked really, really good. I thought it was a really good looking panel. They shrunk the bezels down a little bit on the sides from the previous generation. They made these MacBooks a little bit smaller in size from the previous generation, but they maintained that same, screen size, which was actually really, really cool. Now we had, the touch bar at the bottom portion as well. Now this was the one thing that either people love it or people hate it. Personally, I'm kind of indifferent about it, to be honest. There's some pros, there's some cons, there's some things I like about it and not, but I think the touch bar I think it was a decent choice. But there was another MacBook, that base model, that didn't have the touch bar. Funny enough, the touch bar is now more of a con, and they don't even have it on the Pro models anymore. On the 14-inch and 16-inch ones, they totally removed it, mostly because I think a lot of people didn't really like it at that point. Personally, I think it kind of made the MacBook feel a little bit more premium, and it made it seem like it was much more of a flagship than having those standard buttons. So it's funny we've kind of gotten backwards. But I will definitely tell you, whether you have the touch bar or not, the design of this MacBook still looked really good. But the worst thing about these MacBooks was the keyboard. These MacBooks had this, butterfly keyboard mechanism, which was good in theory, but horrible in execution. And essentially what happened was these keyboards had way less travel and less clicking than standard keyboards than before. So with the 2015 MacBook, you had a full-size keyboard they clicked in, and those keys felt really, really good. With these specific keyboards, there was way less travel, so when you were clicking on it didn't really seem like you were clicking. It kind of seemed like you were just kind of mushing these keys together. And I honestly, although I think the touch bar, I don't really care about the touch bar too much. I don't really hate it or love it. That keyboard I really didn't like. And that's why I kind of kept my 2015 MacBook for quite a bit of time, mostly because I didn't want to give up my USB Type-A ports, but also the keyboard on this thing, it just really wasn't a good look from Apple for making a keyboard like that. They wanted to make a machine that was as small and as slim and as portable as possible. And in this specific example, they really had to sacrifice a lot in order to keep this specific type of design. So I think when it comes down to that, I'm definitely not a fan of this keyboard, and that's easily one of the weirder things about this MacBook. Now you also had the two speaker grills on the side, even on the 13-inch model, which was actually really cool. Then you had a pretty decent size, Magic trackpad, the trackpad at the bottom. It was bigger than the previous generations, which I actually did like a lot. So having a bigger size trackpad, I think was really cool. And again, it made this, MacBook seem a little bit more future-proofed in so many different ways. Now on the sides, you had either two USB Type-C ports if you got the base model, or you had 4 USB Type-C ports if you got the higher end end model. And personally, like I mentioned before, having those types of, more ports on it is actually really cool. And I love having as many USB Type-C ports as possible. In this specific example, a little bit of a different story in my opinion, but I definitely do think when it comes down to it, with something like this specific keyboard in my opinion, and this type of design, it's a hit or miss. The keyboard was a little weird, the touch bar may have been a little weird for some people, but people like the USB Type-C ports. They just wish they gave us a little bit more ports on this thing. Maybe they wish they still had at least one USB Type-A port, or at least an SD card. Since then, we have gotten the SD card back on our MacBook Pros, but for Apple to go ahead and remove everything at one point and give us a brand new MacBook, it's very, very hard for people to go ahead and actually switch over to it. And that's why for so many years after the 2016, 2017, 2018, even I would say up until the 2019 16-inch MacBook, so many people were not recommending these MacBooks at all. It was crazy. And so much so that people actually ended up recommending the older MacBooks. And I think at some point Apple actually saw this. I think Apple actually realized that, hey, our stubbornness is now going to go ahead and just have people kind of adapt to it. And even so many years later, people were still complaining about it. And Apple actually had to completely switch ways. They started developing their own chipsets with their M1 lineup, which was really nice. But then they actually had to go ahead and give us our MacBook Pro with our ports back. So everything kind of went full circle, but this was the MacBook that kind of originated at, which was so crazy. Now, power-wise, I think these MacBooks still have quite a bit of power within them. They weren't known of having like the best power for the, money you were giving them to, but I do think, I still, mess around with my 2015 iMac, and I still use my 2015 MacBook Pro for a lot of different things. And I would say the 2016 MacBook Pro sits in the middle, somewhere in between. If you get the 15-inch higher end model, that's going to be a little bit more powerful, but I would say for something like the 16-inch MacBook Pro, this specific device, it really isn't worth it anymore. And I think a lot of people probably, realize that. I think the only reason it would be kind of worth it is if you're really not being a portable user, if you're just kind of rocking your 16-inch MacBook and you're plugging it into a monitor and that's it, and you're not really utilizing it at all. That may be one thing you may want to look at, is if you want something like a device you're going to set aside, that may be something that, you may, see in this device. But if you're actively trying to use this MacBook, some things, the power within it can be better. The M1 chip devices, even the M1 MacBook Air, even the M1 Mac Mini may be a better deal than this thing. And you can buy this MacBook for around the same price as the M1 Mac Mini, and I'd rather buy the Mac Mini in my opinion. On top of that, with things like this device's power, with the fans always kicking on with this type of device with the Intel chipset, there's some pros, there's some cons within this device, but it just doesn't really make too much sense to buy this MacBook anymore. Even with the 2015 MacBooks, they're starting to show their age. These things sooner than later are going to be unsupported with software. I think the 2015 MacBook Pro is at its last leg of software right now too. So because of those things, we're stuck in a situation. Either we keep recommending these MacBooks to people that are severely kind of already outdated, or we just go ahead and tell them to go buy something like a 2020 M1 MacBook or a 2020 M1 MacBook Air, and those things are starting to go down in the used market as well. So the choice is yours, but I would definitely recommend you, in my opinion, to go towards something like the M1 MacBook Air or the M1 MacBook Pro. Those things are going to be much better deals in my opinion, and that's where I would recommend you to spend your money at, in my opinion, overall. So when it comes down to it, that's kind of how it's summed up in my opinion. I don't think these MacBooks are worth it anymore, but luckily for you, you can still buy an M1 MacBook Air or an M1 MacBook Pro. So that kind of covers it. I would love to hear your opinion on this. Let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.